Good morning. I'm Pete Najarian on this beautiful Monday morning. I hope everybody had a great weekend. And I got to tell you something. We are the take. We are Market Rebellion. And as you saw, we're going to have a great opportunity after the markets today. And we're going to be talking with the one and only Stephen Weiss. That ought to be pretty interesting. It's always a lot of fun. And been a friend for a really long time. It's going to be great to have him aboard. So go back to last week. We take a look at last week, and the markets actually started off very strong on Friday. The Dow was up a couple of hundred points, but it wasn't over with. Then it started to accelerate and actually held on for the rest of the day and held up and actually closed nearly 450 points to the upside. Then you take a look over at the NASDAQ. It was kind of waffling around. We talked about that last week, right around unchanged. But then the NASDAQ just started to lift up as well, and it exploded to the upside, actually closing up 140 points. So a very nice big move out of the NASDAQ as well. Volatility continues to be in that 16, 17 range, a little bit closer to the middle 16s. As a matter of fact, closed right around 16 and a quarter. But let's talk about volumes again. 39 million contracts trading on Friday. I'm talking about a summer Friday going into the weekend, coming out of the short week, and 39 million contracts. We've been talking about this over and over and over again. Again, the leadership has sort of gone back to the same types of leaders. We've got Apple, 2.7 million contracts traded on Friday. Tesla, 1.3 million contracts trading on Friday. Then we dropped down a little bit, but AMC, Virgin Galactic, we had Amazon, we had NEO, all of those over 600,000 in volume. So a lot of great volume, very well distributed. And of course, the big leaders seem to have taken back over that reign to sit at the very top, with Apple and Tesla leading the way. Crude, not that far off of 75 on Friday, so a nice sort of moving around. We've watched crude actually get pulled back a little bit. We know that it had spiked early in the pre-markets last week, pulled back, got into the 72, 73, but here we are closing a lot closer to 75. That was something. And we got the bounce out of the 10-year. And when you get the bounce out of the 10-year, what's going to happen? Financials are going to start to spike. And that's exactly what we saw on Friday. A really, really incredible day, rip into the upside. Financials up about 3%. And it's great to, I just want to show you some of the comparisons. JP Morgan up 3%. That's a really nice move. Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley up 3+%. A wonderful move. But where were the real moves going on? Well, Discover was up 6%. Capital One was up 5%. By the way, Capital One following up today as well, but we'll get into that in just a second. Materials, energy, moving to the upside, up a couple of percent. Technology up about 1%. And within technology, new highs for Apple. Yeah, everybody got concerned when Apple took that big push to the downside last week. It was a pullback going into Thursday. It was down towards that 140, 141 level once again. That looked like an opportunity. We've had nothing but upside call buying ever since and going into that. So it made a lot of sense. That was something we talked about on the halftime report about, you know what, we hadn't seen it that day, but it only made sense. And that's why we talked about that and the choices that were made to grab a little bit of those options in there on that big pullback. Well, to this morning, Apple hit another all-time high. But we'll get into that a little bit more. Facebook had a really nice day. Netflix had a good day. You know what had a great day was Oracle. We've been talking about that option activity that we've seen coming into Oracle. Oracle has done a great job of performing, relatively speaking, old school tech, everything else. But really over the last week or so, when we started to see some of that unusual option activity hitting in there, boy, that stock absolutely rocketed to the upside. It got just short of 88.50 last week on Friday with a really, really nice move to new highs. So that was something. Also, the bounce from those Chinese names. The Chinese names were really under pressure for all the right reasons. We all know the storyline, but a nice bounce back for some of those names as we got into Friday's trade. Baba, JD, a lot of these various Chinese names with a nice lift to the upside. So what makes this week so important? Well, a lot of things. We are really starting to kick off again, and we always say this, but kicking off again with earnings season. It starts with these financials. That's what everybody's been focused on, and it really does start to kick off this week. You got JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, you name it, you've got it. And there's a lot of other names in there as well. We've got Pepsi and a couple of United Healths. There's some major names, but the banks are really what everybody's focused on. So what are we looking at this morning? We come in, markets were down over a couple hundred points. By the time we got a little bit closer to the open, markets were down about 130 points. I'm talking about the Dow. Meanwhile, the NASDAQ was in very nice positive territory, up about 50, 60 points. We opened, we were still down nearly 100 points, not quite on the Dow, and we were a little bit less. We were up about 40 points or thereabouts as far as the NASDAQ. We've been slowly melting down on the NASDAQ, actually getting into the negative territory not too long after the opening. But you take a look over at the Dow itself, and a nice consistent move to the upside. Last I looked, we were trading close to or right around up 100 points. So a really big flip from what started off the day. And what was really pulling on the markets early on? Well, it was financials, it was energy, it was materials. A big flip. Suddenly the energy stocks went from negative to positive. The financials went from negative to positive in a bigger way. And the materials started to flip as well. So we started to see all of this, and technology started to ease back, obviously, along with some of what's going on with semiconductors. And you throw all that in, semis a little bit flatter, but biotech definitely contributing somewhat, at least, to the downside move that we are seeing. 10 years still trading a little bit underneath 1.4 or thereabouts. It has lifted off of some of those levels that seemed to have everybody so up in arms last week, and now they're going to have to come up with more excuses on why the 10 years moving around the way it is. But the markets have been obviously keying off some of that, especially when you're looking at the financials, and we had this big, nice reversal in the financials. Crude early on, definitely under some pressure. It was down about 1%. We were underneath that 74 level once again. That's going to be a storyline that we'll continue to watch very, very closely. But the interesting thing about what we were seeing, at least in the pre-market, was the reopen trade. Now, there was a little bit of pressure there because names like Carnival Cruise, Norwegian Cruise Lines, those names, some of the airlines, United Airlines and so forth, were under a little bit of pressure. And meanwhile, when you look around, you start to see names like DocuSign starting to move to the upside. It really makes you kind of scratch your head on where are we on COVID? Where are we on this next Delta sort of variant that everybody's been talking about? Now, certainly, there's a little bit of angst and a little bit of confusion, and everybody's going to be watching these numbers, obviously, very, very closely. But the real numbers, it's going to be about the financials as we get into this earnings season, and that does kick off tomorrow. So, couple of unusuals for you. I'm going to start off with Brinker. EAT is the symbol, eat. Now, you're talking about Chili's, you're talking about Maggiano's. Really, really interesting to see this one. We don't see it very often. 62.65 is where the stock was trading, so a little over 62.50. Buyers of 4,500 of the July 65 calls. Not a whole lot of time, but 4,500 of those trading from 55 cents up to about $1. So that was number one. Number two, we've seen a couple of different biotech type names, some of the healthcare names hitting already on our unusual options activity. AstraZeneca really stood out for me because this is a name that hasn't come up as often. I haven't seen it very frequently of late on the unusual option activity. So it stood out for me. Stock was trading around 60.50, and all this talk about variance and everything else. Buyers of 5,800 of the July 61 calls, so just out of the money calls. Those were going for 25 cents up to 38 cents. Not a whole lot of money, but still it gives you an opportunity to see if there's going to be a move to the upside. These options certainly could perform very, very rapidly. Folks, hopefully you understand what I'm talking about when I'm talking about a lot of these different things in the options world. Time frame is very important, along with implied volatilities and all the rest of that, all of those Greek pricing mechanisms that go into the options world. If you don't understand that, make sure that you get educated, read books. We've got great educators here as well. Really proud of our team. And by the way, we're going to get, and I'm going to get right back to this, my buddy Stephen Weiss. A lot of people think we don't like each other. That is not true at all. We actually are really, really good friends. And Stephen Weiss is going to be joining us tonight. You got to register, or you're going to have to watch it later. So register for that and get on there. We're going to be right after the close today. It's going to be pretty exciting, and he's going to give us a lot of his ideas about what's going on in the markets. One thing I absolutely have always respected about Stephen is this. He actually understands and does execute within the derivatives markets on a fairly regular basis. So he's a guy who really understands that you can use leverage. Sometimes it makes more sense to use the stock, but a lot of the time it makes more sense to use the options. We'll be talking to him about a lot of different topics. Folks, have a great day of trading. Be safe, be smart. We'll see you tomorrow.